Voltaire said, "History never repeats itself. Man always does." Is it possible to change? It is possible to change, but it requires effort, it requires truth, and it requires tools. How you doing? My name is Rob Hunter. This is Equal Matters, a podcast focused on realism, depth, and knowledge. The intro, which I love so much, was created by my friend Cal, the guitar hero. He appeared on Equal Matters after his nationwide tour a few episodes back. Definitely check it out because Cal is amazing. He just lives his best life and has created the life that he wants, which is part of the lesson today, is creating a life for yourself. Because it ties into what we do as this country, and it ties into change. Because as I mentioned, change does require steps. Change as a country, change as a person, changes you. And what I find so fascinating in looking at my own personal development and looking at the lessons and the tools that I use that resonate with me, I look at our country and our country's decision-making through our politicians, and I want this country to change. Because like me, I believe that this country is headed on the same path. It's a self-destructive path. So at the age of 39, 6 years ago, I knew I needed to make a major change because I wasn't happy. My depression that I've been diagnosed with 19 still lingering. So that's 20 years of living in the dark, essentially. Now, it wasn't always bad. I've had amazing friendships throughout my entire life, moments of inspiration from them, people that I could talk to. It wasn't always easy, but I kind of believed that it was just the way that I am, and there's nothing I could do about it. And I think many of us believe the same thing about this country, like, oh, well, it is the way it is. I got a choice between a Republican and a Democrat, and I pick one, and then I move on and let the decisions be where they are. But I look at it a different way, because what I love so much about this country is, in talking about Cal the guitar hero, you are allowed your own personal pursuit of happiness. It's one of my favorite things written in the Declaration of Independence. Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So you've got your life, that's yours. You've got your liberty, your freedom, your ability to pursue happiness in your own way, so long as you don't harm anybody else. And what I love about this path, this life path, is that you can pick. And it's ultimately up to you. Because I realize that in being able to pursue what I've pursued for the last 23 years, I'm so happy that I got to do it. When I was 14 years old, a couple people came to me. My voice had changed going through puberty, and two people randomly said to me, "Hey, man, you got a great radio voice." And at the time, I was like, what? Is that a job? People do that? So I started listening to the radio more. Started understanding, oh, maybe I could do that. I started doing morning announcements at my high school, my first time behind a microphone. That was pretty fun. 16 years old. And around that same time, I discovered a college, Emerson College, Boston, Massachusetts. And I discovered this college because they had a radio station, 88.9 WERS, that had a hip-hop show. So at the time, 14, 15, 16, all I cared about was hip-hop. All I wanted to do was be a hip-hop DJ. So those two things kind of pointed me in the right direction. And when it came time to choose my college, I came down to two choices. Northeastern University, also in Boston, and Emerson College. Northeastern was the safe choice. Go get an engineering degree, do a little bit of radio on the side. Emerson was the risky choice. That was the one I really wanted. And I remember at the time, 17 years old, being torn, but ultimately deciding to do the one I was passionate about, which was go to Emerson College and host 88.9 at night. That was the hip-hop show. So that, to me, started this path, this journey through life. And that was something that I found purpose in. At first, I found the purpose in hip-hop, but that hip-hop purpose, which got me to Emerson College, which got me some radio experience, which helped me get my first job in radio professionally in Gainesville, Florida, in 2000. So I'm 22 years old, I'm depressed, and I get this shot. And how I know there was a purpose wrapped around it is because it just felt right. It gave me something I could focus on and do. And when I was focused on the tasks at hand, at becoming a very good radio show host, great radio show host, because that was the goal, I just consumed myself with doing that. I didn't drag myself to do it. I didn't force myself to do it. I just loved it. And in finding that purpose, I do believe that that is what saved my life. Because had I not had my ability to pursue my own happiness, and I got some job that I didn't want, I don't know what would have happened to me. Because at least I had this thing, this job, this purpose, this career that I could focus on when things were bad. But at the age of 39, I was tired of those patterns. I was tired of doing the same thing over and over again. As my man Mike Russell would say, do what you always do, get what you always got. That was me. Doing what I always done, getting what I always got. But expecting different results, but wondering why the results weren't different, wondering why I couldn't change. So at the age of 39, I'd accepted this is the way that I was. That was a belief that I had. The belief was, well, it's the way you're born, bruh. Good luck with that. Because people don't really tell you don't have to be that way if you don't want to, that there are tools, there are things you can do, you can change. Yeah, it requires work, it requires effort, but everything does. Everything worth doing requires work. So what I did at the age of 39 is made a decision to improve my life. Because I had heard one thing, which I'll get into more later on Equal Matters. It was just a phrase. Your thoughts are not your own. And it struck me as so bizarre, and I thought about that and still think about that to this day. I'm like, well, if they're not mine, where do they come from? Mary Morrissey was the woman that said it. She's a personal developer. She had a conference. My wife got some tickets, said, you want to go? I said, all right, I like to hang out with my wife. Yeah, sure. So I go there, and she says that, and I'm noodling on that. And how she explained it, Mary Morrissey, your thoughts are not your own, is that you pick them up along the way, that sometimes someone says some things to you. Maybe it's a parent, maybe it's a teacher, maybe it's a cousin, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a kid down the street. And you accept those beliefs and they come into your head. Other times they're just ideas and thoughts that are just floating by, and sometimes your brain, acting as an antenna, picks them up. And it was so freeing to hear that and understand that concept, because that was what really shook a lot of things loose for me, to be able to understand that I can change. And I feel that same way about this country. Because at 39, it was necessary for me to change because the pattern of self-destructive behavior was continuing. And we all know what happens with self-destructive behavior. It ends badly. So facing that choice, facing that decision, making that choice, taking responsibility for myself and my decisions and my beliefs and my patterns was what really set me over the edge to get on a path to improvement, to get mentally resilient, to be able to kind of adapt to whatever comes my way. I'll give you an example. Recently, Mrs. Hunter and I had our water service line burst. And it's so strange how these things happen, because we were out of town. So we're a couple thousand miles away. We live in Arizona. We were in Florida at the time. So I get a call from the city of Phoenix that says, oh, you got some water gushing out the side of your house. I was like, great. So I get the message. I immediately call the city. They re-infirm, we turned the water off. I said, okay, great. Turns out our neighbor had called because she had seen the water service line break. So that was a pretty massive step. The city came out on a Wednesday night at midnight to turn the water off, which I thought was pretty cool. Way to go, Phoenix. But I get this information and I don't react emotionally. Now, had I gotten this information at, say, the age of 25 or 35, I would be like, oh my God, woe is me. This is horrible. The situation was what it was. Reality is reality. Reality always wins. So in being able to manage that, in doing some training with some tools, I was immediately able to shift into problem-solving mode. Problem-solving mode immediately. I called my buddy, who lives up the street. I said, Rob, New York Rob. You've heard him a couple times here on Equal Matters, a retired New York City police officer. I said, Rob, can you swing by the house when you get a chance? I just want to see if there's any damage because there was a water leak. So he's like, yeah, I'm just wrapping up here. I'll be over there in like 20 minutes. So 20 minutes later, he calls me. Doesn't see any damage. I have him look in the house. Doesn't see any damage. And I'm like, okay, awesome. Everything's okay. Prior to that, calling Rob, I had mentally prepared. I said, my entire house might be flooded. Be ready. All your stuff might be destroyed. Be ready. And I had some training in that as well because I lived through Hurricane Katrina. I covered it at the radio station I worked at. I stayed during the storm, and then we left. We left the day after the storm because we couldn't broadcast anymore, but none of us stopped at our houses or apartments. We didn't know what we had. So we left with whatever we packed to go live at the radio station for a couple days. So you had to survive, we did, for 4 or 5 weeks with like 3 pairs of clothes and not knowing if you have anything, if you own anything, if everything you have is destroyed, your car, whatever. Luckily for us, we were incredibly blessed. We were on a 3rd floor apartment. It was all good. But you didn't know it at the time. So it kind of helps you adapt to reality. Same thing with this pipe burst. Second step, call the plumber. He was coming back on Sunday night. The plumber's going to get there Monday morning. Fantastic. So they come, they fix it. It was expensive, but the job was done. And I didn't freak out and I didn't panic. So that's just an example of how using some of these tools in my own life have shifted my thinking and shifted the dynamic in my brain. So last week we talked about those tools. First and foremost, there's the view from above. That's like taking the airplane view. I did it for my own decisions. And I tried to spot patterns. I said, okay, let me zoom out here. Let's look at that decision you made in 2000 and that decision you made in 2002 and that other decision you made in 2002 and then there's 2003. And you go through this whole long list of decisions. I did anyways. And I saw the patterns. And I went, okay, now let's dig a little bit deeper. And in digging a little bit deeper, I realized something very important. It's my beliefs that drive my behavior. And I had this big belief staring me in the face, which was the subject of my depression. The belief that I'm not good enough. And that was the belief that I didn't think I could change. I just thought was a part of me. But then I started doing more research. I started looking into more tools. I started going to more conferences, personal development conferences. I started reading differently and more. I understood that I'm in control of my own story, my own belief system. So after zooming out, after viewing everything from above, after really understanding that I'm in control of me, it's this weird principle called the dichotomy of control because there's a clear line between what you can control and what you can't. It's pretty simple. You're only in control of you. What you say, how you say it, what you do. That's it. It's freeing in a way, weird in another way. But in zooming out and looking at the patterns and understanding my belief, I understood it was now time for me to take responsibility for that belief and change it if I wanted to. That's where the work came in. Hours and hours, days and days, months and months, years and years. But I kept at it. And that, in a way, became my new purpose. And it tied in nicely because as I started to go through this and started to change and started to work on myself, a few years after that, we went into a pandemic. And all those tools and all this work that I'd done prepared me for the pandemic, and I made the most of it. I took it as an opportunity, which we'll also talk about more at Equal Matters. But in recognizing those self-destructive patterns and viewing it from above and taking control, I also shifted a thought about blame. Because I always had these excuses that I used to blame my behavior. Oh, my parents got divorced when I was a kid. Oh, this happened, that happened. So you start to tell yourself that story to reinforce that overall belief that me, Rob, was not good enough. Not good enough in anything. Compare yourself to everybody else on a negative way. I mean, everything. Almost every single day I would do that. So being able to take responsibility for that and look at how I blamed other things that were outside of my control for my behavior, which was within my control, I started to change. I started to alter my own personal course, right? Started to change the way that my future would unfold. And quite honestly, it has. Doing all these tools, which I have for you in my online communication course, Master Your Message, if you're interested, won't only help you become a better communicator, it will help you think differently about your own life, because that's part of the reason why we don't communicate so effectively, because we all have beliefs like mine. I'm not good enough. and that comes out in your communication. So you can check it out. Just go to paintedporchstrategies.com/communication, or if you're interested in learning the tools faster and applying them in your life in real time, I'm a coach as well. paintedporchstrategies.com/Rob. So paintedporchstrategies.com/Rob or paintedporchstrategies.com/communication. It's designed to help you because this is the work that I had to do to change my life, to become more of an effective communicator with myself. And in doing all of this work, in doing all these patterns, beliefs, tools, we can apply the same to this country because I believe that we're going down the same path that I was going down for most of my life, a self-destructive path. Because if you look at the patterns since a pivotal moment in world history, 9:03 a.m., 9/11/01, the second plane, United Airlines Flight 175, hit the South Tower. Millions of us watched it live on television. And I use that as the pivotal moment because that was the moment we all understood this was an attack. And when a country's attacked, its presidents, its Congress makes a whole bunch of decisions and starts to repeat patterns, just like I was repeating patterns until I did this work. So the purpose of this podcast, going back to how much I love this country, is exactly that. In living in the day-to-day political world for the last almost quarter of a century, I realize something is missing. It is reflection. It is the view from above. It is the putting aside the blame and understanding what our role in this is. We're voters. Might seem small time, but that's our responsibility because our choices are what make these decisions by politicians possible. As we very rarely weigh our decision-making ability and who we're going to vote for as commander-in-chief. We just don't think about it that way. Or who's going to be our senator or our congressman or woman. We think about it in terms of party. We think about voting in terms of, I like that guy more than the other guy. I like that woman more than the other woman. Oh, it's the lesser of two evils. Okay, great. Because I'm going to use that phrase again, my man Mike Russell likes to bring up. Do what you always do, get what you always got. And if you look at the patterns in America, since going back to 1979 through 9/11 through now, there's a pattern of war, a pattern of spending, and a pattern of Russia. So let's go back to that pivotal moment, 9:03 a.m., 9/11/01, and let's examine the 22 years of decision-making made by presidents on your behalf, spending your money. Politicians often forget that this entire country runs off the work that you do and your friends and your neighbors and everyone in this country. Taxes. We all pay a lot of them. That's what funds all of these decisions. And the politicians spend it as if they have an unlimited supply of it. But obviously they don't. Because when we were attacked, the United States national debt was $3.3 trillion. Keep that number in mind. $3.3 trillion when President George W. Bush said this.
Today we've had a national tragedy. Two airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country. I have spoken to the Vice President, to the Governor of New York, to the Director of the FBI, and have ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act.
And that's exactly what the United States did. President Bush, with Congress, decided to go to war in Afghanistan in October of that year, less than a month after the 9/11 attack.
On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes against al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan.
At the time, that made sense, right? We all were feeling it. The approval rating of the president was extremely high, and we wanted revenge. Because like as you do as an individual, we do as a country. We get emotional. We're human beings. We're emotional beings. Sometimes we react emotionally. And in doing research about the Afghanistan war, it started to go awry relatively quickly. And that was basically because the first war effort in Afghanistan was very successful. Destroyed a lot of al-Qaeda camps, got them on the run, almost got bin Laden early on, and started taking on the Taliban. The Taliban is important as al-Qaeda is important because the patterns of American decision-making leading up to 9/11, as we discussed last week in part 1, was Jimmy Carter as president funding a group in Afghanistan called the Mujahideen. The Mujahideen were fighting against Russian incursion. At first, when the funding went in, Russia was not at war, but Russia was trying to influence Afghanistan to be a communist nation. And if you look at the patterns of America before 1979 in funding the Mujahideen, go back to Vietnam. Same type of story, right? Communism was spreading in Vietnam, and America wanted to step in and do it. And this is after the French had left and left us with the bag. So we stayed in that war. 55,000 American soldiers were killed. And for me, super personal because I think I was 13 years old, went on a family trip to Washington, D.C. My dad's a Vietnam veteran. We were standing at the Vietnam Memorial, and my dad was pointing to names of people that he knew, friends of his, that were killed in the war. And at 13, you're just becoming an adult in so many ways. This was fresh off Iraq War I. So war, as a kid, you look at it in a certain way, especially if you're an emotional kid like I was. So that moment sticks in my mind because if you look at the pattern and you look at and you go back even to the 60s, right, the 50s, you see a pattern of a belief system in America that we're the good guys, which we are, but we always got to fight the Russians and the communists. Can't have the spread of communism. So we commit all these resources, lives, money, all kinds of other things, to these causes. And the pattern is right back where we started today. We pointed this out last week, but last year, in February, Russia invaded Ukraine.
After months of preparations, the Russian President Vladimir Putin has launched a major military operation against Ukraine. Speaking on national television, Mr. Putin urged Ukrainian troops to lay down their arms and go home. He warned that anyone who interfered in Russia's actions would face retaliation. Loud explosions have been now heard in Ukraine in lots of different cities as the Russian assault has begun. President Biden said that the world will hold Russia accountable for its aggression.
And it's been held accountable with a lot of your money, a lot of people's lives, and almost an entire country destroyed. Patterns, beliefs, decision-making. You see how they all tie together? So if we rewind the clock back again to Bush invading Afghanistan again, everybody thought that was the right thing to do. And at the time, it probably was. But right away, the Americans knew that this was a war that was getting out of control that didn't have any objectives. Because the Taliban at the time, in 2001, controlled about 3/4 of the country. Taliban didn't put up much of a fight against the American military, so they just basically disappeared, were killed, whatever. But now you have this entire country that doesn't have any form of government. The United States had allied up with a rebel group in Afghanistan and tried to prop them up. And in doing so, trying to build a country, it became the quagmire that Afghanistan became. 20 years, $2.3 trillion, 2,400 or so U.S. soldiers were killed. Many more were wounded. Many more will never be the same. That's on top of the thousands and thousands of civilians that were killed in Afghanistan because of a war. And it's easy to look back at it, and it's easy to go, wow, it wasn't worth it. The beginning stages were. But it's approaching Afghanistan like Vietnam with no objectives, no end in sight, no clear path to victory, no even idea of what victory is, where that do what you always do, get what you always got comes from. Because let's go back to the debt. On September 11th, 2001, the United States debt was about $3.3 trillion. We spent almost that much in Afghanistan alone, $2.3 trillion. Huh, isn't that interesting? And then, when you get to Afghanistan, you add in another $1 trillion. So you're spent the entire national debt on 2 wars. Patterns, beliefs, recognition. And in looking at my own life and doing the same thing, like, wow, you really did the same thing at 19 and 29 and 33 and 35 when I had to tell myself the truth. I had to accept responsibility for my choices. I had to stop blaming everybody else. And I think that this is a moment that in America we have to do the same thing. We have to stop blaming everybody else. Stop blaming the politicians, stop blaming the right, the left, the progressives, the Trumpers, whatever. Because blame at this point is useless. Just like blame in my own life was useless except to cover up bad decisions. So I don't want to do that anymore. Not for myself, not for this country. I play a part, you play a part, because after all, this is our country. So when I see the pattern here of war, spending, Russia, I want to add one more thing to it because our rights, our freedoms are at play here. Because shortly after launching the war in Afghanistan, Congress, the House and the Senate, overwhelmingly passed the Patriot Act, and it was signed by President Bush, I think on October 25th or 26th, 2001.
Today we take an essential step in defeating terrorism while protecting the constitutional rights of all Americans. With my signature, this law will give intelligence and law enforcement officials important new tools to fight a present danger. I commend the House and Senate for the hard work they put into this legislation. Members of Congress and their staffs spent long nights and weekends to get this important bill to my desk. I appreciate their efforts and bipartisanship in passing this new law.
The new law, the Patriot Act, wasn't used to catch terrorists. It wasn't used to catch the new Osama bin Laden. It was used to catch drug dealers. It was used to spy on you. That's the cold, hard reality of this. This is why these decisions are important, because this country has a belief system, a system of government that's spelled out in the United States Constitution. And in this United States Constitution, it affords you rights that you're born with, that cannot be taken away by the government. One of those is that the government isn't really allowed to spy on you without due process, a warrant, you know. They didn't do that. After the Patriot Act passed, the NSA spied on everybody, National Security Agency, just gathered a bunch of your data. Edward Snowden pointed it out, and he now lives in Russia. There's the pattern again. But what struck me as so strange is that despite Edward Snowden's revelation, we just went about our business. Yeah, there was outrage for a little while. Outrage on both sides. Some people called Snowden a traitor. I thought, no, he's telling us something we need to know. That our government is doing something outside of its constitutional responsibilities. And that followed the CIA and the FBI, because they did it too. CIA spied on you, FBI spied on you. All thanks to the Patriot Act. Which is why it's important to look at these decisions. Spot the patterns. Because the only way you can change the outcome is if you change the patterns. Then you have to change the patterns, you have to change the belief system. So I want to go back to this idea that I had. This is just the way I am, because I really feel that America is apathetic at this moment. This is just the way we are. The best we have to choose from. Is it really? Because like me, I knew I had to do the work. And I know I'll constantly have to do the work. But I'm up for it because I like the work. It's freeing. It's putting me in a much better place to be in control of my future, which I am. And in doing that work, it allows me to be prepared for whatever's going to come. And then I can adapt to it in a way that I see fit based on my past experiences, my knowledge. Because again, this is a podcast, Equal Matters, that's about realism, depth, and knowledge. Because I view most of the world right now as one big reality show. Social media influencers doing crazy things to get attention. You got people that, this is the way you hack Instagram, if you want to know, or Facebook or TikTok. hire a video person or two, wear a microphone all the time, and have them film everything you do. So if you got that money, you can get up on that Instagram with quickness because the algorithm wants content. It wants people to react to things. So I view some of that, much of it, as a reality show. In American politics, at this moment in 2023, has become a big reality show. Big personalities, big brands, trying to get attention because attention means fundraising. Attention means ambitions, bigger office. So that's the reality show of American politics that confronts us, which makes it very difficult to change, which makes it very difficult to spot the patterns. Well, spotting the patterns isn't difficult. It's changing the patterns because we keep voting for the same people over and over again. I mean, it's kind of wild to me that we don't take more risks, calculated risks. We don't ask politicians about their decision-making or look at their decision-making or why they voted for this or why they voted for that, and then what happened after they voted for that. Because I go back to the invasion of Afghanistan. In the present, at the time, in October of 2001, that's what the country wanted. We didn't want the end result of just leaving Afghanistan, leaving advanced weaponry behind, including Black Hawk helicopters, which is now in control of the Taliban. So Afghanistan is worse off after our involvement. The Taliban has better weapons, including Black Hawks. And the Taliban is brutally oppressive, especially for women and girls. So how are we not looking at this as a failure? How are we not looking at this as something to change, to not do again? Because if you look at Vietnam, whoop, you look at Afghanistan, got it. You look at the Patriot Act, spying on Americans, all day, every day. And then we weren't done there because the patterns continue. The patterns of politicians lying, bending the truth, and doing it on a big stage. Remember the Secretary of State, Colin Powell? You remember the weapons of mass destruction speech as America, 2 years after invading Afghanistan, a year and a half, actually, start planning to go into Iraq.
I cannot tell you everything that we know, but what I can share with you, when combined with what all of us have learned over the years, is deeply troubling. What you will see is an accumulation of facts and disturbing patterns of behavior. The facts in Iraq's behavior demonstrate that Saddam Hussein and his regime have made no effort to disarm as required by the international community. Indeed, the facts and Iraq's behavior show that Saddam Hussein and his regime are concealing their efforts to produce more weapons of mass destruction.
That wasn't true. But a war ensued. Another $1 trillion was spent. Thousands of more lives were cost, including American soldiers, civilians. It was brutal. And what's the end result? I don't know. I don't know what's going on in Iraq. I mean, that's up to them, but it makes you look back at these decisions and go, I'm not blaming Bush at this point. I'm not blaming Powell. I'm just looking at the decisions, zooming out, seeing the pattern of war, pattern of spending, pattern of political lies leads to another war, of which we bought and paid for, just like we did in 1979, just like we did at first in Vietnam. So shortly after Colin Powell gave that weapons of mass destruction speech, it was on. America went into Iraq.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger. On my orders, coalition forces have begun striking selected targets of military importance to undermine Saddam Hussein's ability to wage war. These are opening stages of what will be a broad and concerted campaign.
It was broad. It was concerted. And this is no disrespect to the soldiers because they did their jobs admirably. The battle plans, the initial phases in both Iraq and Afghanistan were brilliant, executed brilliantly. It's when politics gets involved when it becomes riskier for our soldiers. Politics of building countries, which, again, we have tried to do numerous times in the last 30 or 40 or 50 years and Haven't had great results. After World War II, we did, but they were different cultures in Germany and Japan than they were in Afghanistan. Afghanistan has long been a tribal country, and the Russians fought a 10-year war in 1979, 1989, and Afghanistan won. Yet we still went in there with this idea that, oh, no, we can do it. Aha, we can do it, the Russians cannot. It's that decision-making that needs to change, in my opinion. And what does change take? It takes a willingness to tell the truth. It takes an effort to change, to do things better, to zoom out, view from above, and recognize the patterns in your decision and understand what the beliefs that are motivating this. Because the belief in my life, as I mentioned, was I'm not good enough. So subconsciously, all those decisions I was making were to prove to myself that that statement was true, that my belief was true. Because then you make that next bad decision and you go, of course, I'm not good enough. Make another bad decision. Well, of course, I'm not good enough. Just the way that I am, I'm not good enough. Feels like the country has that same belief. Not necessarily that we're not good enough, but not wanting to change. Completely fine with the current patterns. Now, this is not going to be an easy thing to change, just like my life wasn't easy to change. It's going to require effort. It's going to require you to play a role, me to play a role. Share this knowledge. Share this pattern recognition. Share these change efforts, which is so interesting because I now am going to help companies change. My wife, Mrs. Hunter, started a company called Painted Porch Strategies, focused on change. And change comes down to three things, because change is a skill. And I don't know if you know the stat. Over 70% of change efforts fail in business. Same thing. Because if you try to change and you don't have the right tools and the right training and the right mindset, it's going to fail. Only 2% of business initiatives, change initiatives, achieve their goals 100%. 2%. Because change is hard. And it's having people, yourself, myself, willing to be able to not just tell the truth, but handle the truth. So change, according to Painted Porch Strategies, comes down to three things. Mindfulness and mindset. How aware of your own thoughts, your own feelings, and how does that impact how you interact with other people? How aware are you of other people's mindsets, emotions, thought patterns? Because that ties into change element number 2, which is communication. Because communication is like a dance. It's my area, my specialty. I mentioned Master Your Message before, my communications and performance course. Because life really is all about communication. Every relationship is about communication. Every workplace is about communication. Every country is about communication. You can change the way you can communicate. You can adapt. You can be more understanding of other people. And you can understand through communication with yourself how your beliefs impact your decisions and create patterns. Patterns which you can recognize and change if you're willing to do the work. The third step to change is teamwork, because change always requires a team. That team, America, you and me. We have to be willing to be able to talk nonpartisan politics about political decisions. Because at this point, I don't care about Republicans and Democrats. I've often not voted for a Republican or a Democrat, choosing a third-party option. But I voted for both Republicans and Democrats over the years. And I don't like the results that I'm getting. Just like I didn't like the results I was getting in my own life. And knowing that if I didn't change, those results would have gotten worse and worse and worse. To who knows what. I might be living alone in, I don't know, some small town with 6 cats at this point. I don't know. But I don't know because I made a different decision. Because if you go back to September 2001, I mentioned the U.S. debt at the time was $3.3 trillion. In the 22 years since, through 2 wars, through a Patriot Act, a whole bunch of other political decisions, and now funding another war started by Russia, guess what? $33 trillion in United States debt. That's a self-destructive pattern. Congressman David Schweikert has joined us here a couple times on Equal Matters to talk about those things, the biggest challenges facing America. One of them, the biggest one, is our spending. Because our benefits that you get, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, are real expensive. Not enough workers. There's an imbalance in the system. But we're just going to keep riding down the train, following this path until we self-destruct. And self-destruction in America's case doesn't mean the end of the country and it's going to be desolate and horrible. It just means we'll be more like Europe. European countries, they don't seem to work that hard anymore. Then their economies barely grow. There aren't great job opportunities. I think I read a stat recently that the average American household is about $60,000. That's like the middle class number, which is probably not true with inflation anymore. It's probably closer to 70. In Europe, 48,000. So we, on average, are more productive than Europe, and we have better wages than Europe, and our standard of living is better. I've also read that the poor people in America live like middle-class people in Europe, just to compare. That is more along the lines of what our future holds. Because if nothing happens with Social Security, as Congressman Schweikert has told us here in Equal Matters, again, realism, truth. Truth is, in 9 years, less than, Social Security benefits are going to have to be cut 25%. It's just not enough money. That will double senior poverty. That's the future we're looking at without changes. That's the future we're looking at if we don't recognize these patterns and start voting differently and asking different questions of our politicians. What kind of decisions you're going to make about that? Social Security. Medicare, the spending is up like 16% this year. A lot of people during the pandemic put off procedures, now getting them again. But that money has to come from somewhere. So those are our two most expensive programs. And they both run out of money. And in 9 years, this country will look fundamentally different if you are a senior. And if you're not a senior, it will fundamentally look different when you are a senior because you will not really be able to rely on Social Security. Maybe not even Medicare at that point. Here's the thing about Medicare. Just a challenge, not right or wrong and different. Again, no blame here. Responsibility is different than blame. Blame is negative and absolves your responsibility from it because you're blaming. You're pointing outward. Responsibility is pointing inward, even when it's tough. Because here's it. Reality is reality. What's done's already done. You already made your decision. So if you go back and you look at it and you feel guilty or shame about it, work with that. Don't run from it. Figure it out. That's what I had to do. I spent many long nights sitting on my couch. I have this spot in my house, this little couch spot, where after Mrs. Hunter goes to bed sometimes, I stay up late, 2, 3 in the morning, and I just work on things, work through things. That's my process. Got to find your process to be able to work on those tough things from the past, those tough decisions that you didn't like. And what I started to do is I started to re-examine those decisions and look at them from all angles. This is another great tool that View from Above affords you. Is you're not looking straight at a problem, you're looking above it. So now you can go over here and look at this and look at the ripple effects, which is exactly what I want us to do as a country, what I think we need to do as a country, because if we look at the patterns, going back to 1979, we have 44 years of decisions that has brought on tons of debt that we now have to deal with, figure out a way out of. Wars, spent a lot of money, cost a lot of lives, with no results to show, which is why these exercises apply. Because our belief system in this country runs this decision-making. And our current structure is to reward the same politicians who make these decisions that have ripple effects that impact you, your kids, your grandkids, and future generations. Because this is a country, going back to how much I love it, I want to hand it off to the next generation, the generation after that, and that, and that, in a better shape that it is. Which is why I encourage us to do this work now. Because politicians follow us. Because politicians want one thing: be reelected. Most of them will do, say, anything to get reelected. So they're reactive, which means we're in control. But like me, you got to be willing to step into that role, and you have to be able to take yourself on, tell yourself the truth, accept your responsibility for your decisions, and work with it. Work on it. So in this case, when it comes to American politics, the work is going to be in the conversations you have with friends, because we all have our little bubbles, people we know we can talk to. But in shifting away from blame, I'm going to blame Republicans for this, I'm going to blame Democrats for this, I don't do that anymore. Especially if I'm talking to someone that might vote a different way than I do. Because I'm aiming to influence. And influence in this is to think a different way. Because Mary Morrissey, the woman who said your thoughts are not your own, influenced me in such a positive way just by that one statement. Now, I didn't get the results I wanted tomorrow, the next day, but it gave me something to use so I could get the results I wanted. And yeah, they've taken a lot of work, a lot of time on that couch, a lot of late nights. So what? I love that work. That has been the most fulfilling and rewarding work that I've ever done. And if we do that as a country, we approach things, our conversations with our friends, with influence, we can have impacts. It's going to take a while. But let's imagine for a moment, like I imagined at the age of 39, what if I don't change? Again, how do you change? Truth, effort, tools. What is change all about? Mindfulness, your own mindset, your communication, how you communicate internally with yourself, which we work on in Master Your Message, my online program, a lot. Because I developed a tool that has helped me tremendously called RAP, write a RAP. Recognize, assess, process. Like what's going on with you? Recognize what it is, assess where it's happening in your body, what it's doing to you, what it's doing to your thoughts, and then process it. Dig in deeper. Second part of Equal Matters, depth. Depth applies in my own life every single day. Because the decisions I make today stem from some belief, from past experiences, but I'm trying to use those to make better decisions in the present, more impactful decisions, more positive decisions. And we can do the same thing as a country if we do the third element of change, which is teamwork. Got to work together because we have to put our labels aside, our politics aside, our favorite candidates aside, because the country is what matters. And it's not even so much it's the country that matters. It's this idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Because the pursuit of happiness is what allowed me to be happy. To go from a place where I was not happy at all, hardly ever. Around friends, sure, I'd laugh, I'd have a good time, but internally I was not. I was able to change that by doing this work. But it can't just be me. It has to get infectious, contagious, because language, after all, is contagious. What you say impacts other people. How you say it impacts other people. And ultimately, we're looking at a country of 330 million people. There's 330 million individuals, 160 or so million vote. Maybe that'll be more in 2024. Maybe it'll be less. But we have about a year to really start working on this and see what happens in 2024. And then we'll have a midterm in 26 and a presidential election in 28, 32, 36. And that's how I look at this. We're going to make important decisions, you and me, as individuals, for our own lives. And we're going to make decisions about who to vote for and why. And if we focus on that life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, I want kids for eternity in America and around the world to have the same opportunity that I did. To pick something that you really want to do and go after it and give it a shot. And that is possible and will remain possible on a large scale if we can get our politics right. Because if we don't get our politics right, just like if I didn't get my change right at 39, I'd be living alone with 6 cats in an apartment. America will be living alone with 6 cats in an apartment. And that ability to pursue your own happiness will be much more difficult. There'll be a lot more hurdles in the way. There'll be economic challenges in the way. So now's a great time to look at all of these decisions, especially in relation to 9/11, 44 years of decisions, only to be in the very spot we were in 1979. United States buying a war against Russian aggression. So the decisions made over the next 22 years are going to impact people forever. And those decisions, for us, who we vote for, who do we talk to about voting? How can we get different candidates to run for office? Can you run for office? Do you know someone that should run for school board or state representative? Because all of those things matter. And maybe it's not you. Maybe you don't want to get involved. That's fine. But maybe you can talk to your friends and your family. Not to get them to vote differently, to get them to think differently. Because thinking differently is that first step. And whatever tools you want to offer them, I like the view from above. Let's view from above, and let's just look at presidents. Take the party out. Let's just look at their decisions. Let's look at the decision in 1979 of Carter, the consequent decision by Reagan to continue funding the Mujahideen, H.W. Bush to go to war with Iraq, which really ticked bin Laden off, creation of al-Qaeda, the creation of the Taliban from American funding and training, to 9/11, to war in Afghanistan, 20 years, war in Iraq, the Patriot Act, all these things that have changed the dynamic of this country into what it is today. If you cover politics, listen to politics, you understand how divided and fractured this country is, at least in the reality show that is American media and how it covers politics. Down here on ground level, I get the sense that we know this country needs to change. And we know that we need to change with it because we have to drive that change. But I'm going to believe that it's possible. I'm optimistic. I'm hopeful. I love this country. And I'm optimistic because I did this work myself when I thought there was no hope, when I thought that this was the way that I was, and there was nothing I could do about it. Turns out that was very linear thinking, small thinking, no vision, no plan. So my vision for America that I think is still possible for everybody is everybody gets that same opportunity that I did, that you have. And I want kids that haven't been born yet to have more opportunities than I do. Because the whole point of humanity, the way I see it, advance the ball. Make life a little bit better for each subsequent generation. And our politicians aren't doing that because they, too, are stuck in the same patterns of American decision-making that have been happening for a very, very long time. But I'm not giving up. You're not giving up. And I appreciate you being here on Equal Matters. So, in conclusion, change is necessary. Change requires effort. It requires a personal responsibility. It requires tools. Tools that we've talked about in the last two episodes, the view from above, a Stoic principle of which you zoom out to 30,000 feet and you look around. And you examine the situations from up there, not from your emotional state, which we all have because we're all human and we're emotional. Sometimes we react emotionally. Another tool, the dichotomy of control. This is where blame shifts. Blame is outward, as I mentioned. Personal responsibility is inward. Heard this concept, Jocko, Navy SEAL. He calls it extreme ownership. Even if it wasn't your decision where something went wrong, what role did you play in it? What could you have done better? Now, obviously, you can't undo the decision, but you can inform your future decisions. That's the point in doing this lesson. That's the point in zooming out. That's the point in talking about our personal responsibility. Because we are only in control of us. You're in control of you. You're in control of what you say, how you say it, what you do. Collectively, we are in control of where we want this country to go. Because politicians always respond to what we want. So please, if you want to talk to someone about this, I would love it. It'd be fantastic. If you want to share this podcast with someone, I would also love that. Because trying to get the word out, to try to get us to think a little bit differently, and it's not going to happen in the regular media channels. Do what you always do, get what you always got. Time to do something different. Thanks for hanging out on Equal Matters. My name is Rob Hunter. More thoughts like this to come real soon. Zooming out, dichotomy of control. Give you all the tools that we have as Equal Matters dives into realism, the truth, depth, because we need it, knowledge. Knowledge is that understanding that you're in control and you can change however you want. So until next time, I'm Rob Hunter. Good night.